Welcome to Novara Live. I'm Michael Walker. It's a Friday night, which means later, quite soon, I think I'll be joined by Aaron Bastani, doing things slightly differently today because the whole show is really on one theme, which is Donald Trump and the new tech oligarchy. Now, I could say it's only on one theme because I thought this was such an important story, and indeed I do, but there is another aspect to this, which is I woke up with a terrible headache. So I started writing the script a little bit late. We don't have our researcher or Stephen on a Friday. I sort of do all of that myself, which normally works because I wake up early and think I can do all of these different stories in a day. But today, not so. But we have so many interesting stories for you, so much to talk to Aaron about. And I do have a guest to speak about whether we need a new extreme wealth line, an amount of wealth that no one individual should be able to go above. I'm in favour. I think the question is whether or not that can be practical. I've got an interview to show you, and I will be finding out Aaron Bastani's views on that as well. We're at the end of Donald Trump's first week in office, so it's a decent time to take stock. And I want to focus on one key aspect of the first 4 days, which I think will be incredibly consequential for all of us, not just people in the United States, for all of us. And this is, I think, Trump's incredibly close relationship to America's tech oligarchs. This relationship, of course, hasn't been kept a secret. In fact, Donald Trump seems rather proud of it. And this was commentary from Newsmax on his inauguration.
You had Donald Trump sitting there being sworn in as the next president of the United States, his, let's call it likely, top cabinet members right behind him.
Yep.
With Jeff Bezos,
Yes.
Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, Sundar Pichai, Tim Cook.
Yeah.
That was, keep in mind,
They had better seats than the cabinet members,
they had
right?
better
Yeah.
seats than most of the cabinet members. They were sitting in front of, in some cases, the Commerce Secretary, the Defense Secretary, right?
Mhm.
And I wonder, I don't know the answer to this, but I just wonder the statement that Donald Trump was trying to make there.
Well-
Because this was very limited seating. And you had some of the cabinet members there, and it's not random that
No.
in the picture there, obviously, when they're all framed up, you had some of the biggest titans in business.
Yep.
And I would just say the biggest titans in tech, who were the sort of antagonists for many years, who were sitting there front row.
So they're emphasizing how significant this was. Of course, not everyone is relaxed about this. Li Fang is an excellent journalist, I think, actually. He tweeted, over the next decade, Silicon Valley will replace blue and white collar workers with AI and outsource more jobs overseas. Truckers, designers, engineers, lawyers, and far more. Power will flow to the dozen tech overlords standing next to Trump at his inauguration. Ominous optics. Power may be flowing to those tech overlords, but for the immediate term at least, it seems they still recognize who's boss. Later on Monday evening, Mark Zuckerberg held an inauguration party for Donald Trump, clearly bending the knee. It was 3 other CEOs, though, who stood behind Trump a day later at a White House press conference on Tuesday.
We're joined by Oracle Executive Chairman Larry Ellison, SoftBank CEO, my friend Masa Yoshi-san, and CEO of OpenAI, and I would say by far the leading expert based on everything I read, Sam Altman. So that's great that you're coming in together. That's a massive group of talent and money. Together, these world-leading technology giants are announcing the formation of Stargate. So put that name down in your books, because I think you're going to hear a lot about it in the future. A new American company that will invest $500 billion at least in AI infrastructure in the United States and very, very quickly, moving very rapidly, creating over 100,000 American jobs almost immediately. This monumental undertaking is a resounding declaration of confidence in America's potential under a new president. Let me be a new president. I didn't say it, they did.
He's reading that in a really monotone, deadpan way until he saw the words "new president." He's like, "Oh, that's me! That's me! Amazing!" Stargate, the context here, is a joint venture between OpenAI, Oracle, and SoftBank. They claim to have $100 billion ready to invest in data centers and aim to attract $500 billion to invest in the infrastructure needed to power AI. Of course, takes up lots and lots of computing power to train these models. So that's what this is about. By Wednesday, though, it was clear not all of Trump's team were as keen as he is. So in response to a tweet from OpenAI announcing the Stargate project, Musk posted, quote, "They don't actually have the money." Altman initially responded with this: "I genuinely respect your accomplishments and think you are the most inspiring entrepreneur of our time." It's quite a bizarre sort of response to that. I suppose he knows that Musk is closer to Donald Trump than he is. The exchange did ultimately get more heated, though. Elon Musk went on to say SoftBank has well under $10 billion secured. I have that on good authority. Of course, they're saying they've got $100 billion among the consortium ready. And Sam Altman says, "Wrong, as you surely know. Want to come visit the first site already underway. This is great for the country. I realize what is great for the country isn't always what's optimal for your companies, but in your new role, I hope you'll mostly put America first." So Sam Altman there saying Elon Musk is putting his own interests above those of the country. I'm not quite sure if I see Sam Altman's interests as one and the same with the people of America. Aaron, though, I want your thoughts on this, and we haven't spoken since the inauguration. How significant do you think sort of Donald Trump's attention he's giving to Silicon Valley billionaires is, and the sort of attention they're giving to him as well? How significant is this?
It's significant for two reasons. The first is obviously political. These are the wealthiest people in the world. I think that was the 1, 2, 3 of world's wealthiest people, according to the Forbes, rich list on that day. I could be wrong. Obviously, it changes quite a lot because of a lot of their wealth is tied up in the stock valuations of their various companies. But I believe on the day of the inauguration, the 1, 2, 3 was Musk, Bezos, Zuckerberg, about $950 billion worth of wealth, Michael, just short of the GDP of Switzerland. The wealth of Elon Musk is $450 billion, equivalent, I think, more or less, the GDP of Finland. So there's obviously a huge political upside for Trump to be associated with people with that kind of political, economic, and social power. And also just, he's quite a superficial man. I think he just likes mixing with very rich people. And I think that's why they had pride of place in terms of the ceremony ahead of various secretaries of state, right? That's the first point. I think there's the political upside. Now, secondly, I think there's a sort of political economy point here, which is really key, which is that artificial intelligence is going to be one of these critical technologies, even if it's a bit of a hype bubble at the moment, which I think it probably is going to be one of the critical technologies of the next 10, 20, 25 years, with major applications, not just in things like, consumer technologies or finance, but very, very importantly, defense. Very, very importantly. And this is viewed across the political establishment, both Democrat and Republican. It's acknowledged as the benchmark technology. If we lose here, we've lost the cutting edge of technological kind of leadership. If we cede that to China, that makes us militarily vulnerable. So there is clearly a sense of national urgency. I won't say emergency, national urgency, which is, it's kind of congruent with what was going on with Sputnik in the 50s and the threat, the realization that actually the Soviets had some pretty good technology. As it turned out, they couldn't maintain that level of technological development. They couldn't keep pace with the US. And of course, a lot of that technology with regards to Sputnik and the Soviet space program and the US one too, of course, was a legacy of Nazi research. Werner von Braun, of course, famously a Nazi, the gentleman who designed the Saturn V booster rocket for the Apollo missions. So there's two parts of this puzzle, Michael. Political, which of course with Donald Trump always goes hand in hand with media and status. And then there is very much a sort of a political economy point here as well, national interest. All eyes are on whether or not America can maintain, if they even have that right now, leadership in AI. Huge amounts of wealth will be created, captured. But like I say as well, there's the military geopolitical side to things.
Do you think? I mean, you said that you think the AI thing is, is a big deal, but is being somewhat overhyped. Do you think it is being overhyped? Because I know sort of these companies are saying it could be sort of 2 or 3 years until you've got an AI model which can do basically everything a human can do. And so what they're saying is it's not just like ChatGPT where you ask it a question and it gives you an answer, but you can give it instructions. It can visit websites. It can order things. It can do your tax return. A podcast I was listening to suggesting that the guys at Anthropic, I think, who make Claude, have suggested that they think within 2 years you'll be able to have an AI in a couple of minutes do the whole paperwork for an IPO, so an initial public offering of a public company, which currently takes sort of 6 graduates 2 weeks. So it does seem to me that this could be really, really revolutionary. And people might think it's overhyped because it gets talked about quite a lot, but just because it gets, it could be more significant than any technology invented since, well, at least the internet. But do you think it's overhyped, or in what way do you think it's overhyped, I suppose?
Well, I think it's probably more important than the internet. I think it could end up being as important as the steam engine, this general purpose technology, which is the backbone of the Industrial Revolution. That was the first machine age, so the adage goes. This would be the backbone of the second machine age, which is less about replacing physical labor with mechanized labor, but cognitive labor with machines. I talk about this in my book, Michael, Fully Automated Luxury Communism. I think you'd probably be a bit cheeky to say, can we put the link in the description for the book? I'm not suggesting we do, but look, if you want to Google that book and you can go and buy it, feel free to. I talk about a lot of these things. Now, I don't think that the ultimate end use of AI is overhyped. No. Hugely important technology. It's going to replace lots of jobs very quickly, as you already kind of implied there, Michael, particularly in white collar jobs, legal services, accounting, retail. So white collar jobs in terms of very high on the value chain, and then lower on the value chain. Research, pharmaceutical research. A lot of that can be automated. That's not to say you replace all the humans, but you need far fewer humans and much better outcomes, much more productive research. So I think it's incredibly useful. That's before we talk about things like self-driving cars. That's before we talk about all kinds of things, Michael. I was thinking about this the other day. Audiobooks. Right? How many times have you listened to an audiobook and it's not the author? Well, generative AI is probably going to get rid of that, right? You get the author to read one chapter of the book, boom, you're done. I mean, that's just going to be a very obvious use application for generative AI, which is kind of a joke technology in the broad span of artificial intelligence. The reason why I say there's hype, Michael, is because I think there is financial hype around the companies that are promising things like OpenAI. There's a lot of hype. I think there's a lot of investment. I mean, I don't think you would call it euphoric investment. That's the phrase, but I don't think anybody's euphoric right now with regards to the economy globally. But I think lots of people are making bets on AI with legacy companies like Meta, Alphabet, which maybe they don't work. There was that new AI model that came out of China today, DeepSeek, is doing phenomenal things at a fraction of the cost. And a technology like this tends to be disruptive. So the idea that the big companies of today, Alphabet, Meta, Amazon, are going to be the primary beneficiaries is history tells us that's not really how it works. I mean, they may in partnership with the US government. This is partly why they're betting big now on Trump. They want their private business interests to be effectively defended within the US market. But that may mean that America develops inferior products to China in this regard. So that's where when I say it's hype, that's what I mean. This idea that it's going to create a ton of wealth, loads of people are going to get rich. I think there's a scammy element to that, like any really exciting new economic field, right? We had that with the .com crisis in the early 2000s. Pets.com. Just by having a URL, people were like, "This is a multi-billion-dollar business." No, you just have a URL, and that was not the end, as we now know, of online retail, right? Online commerce exploded in the following 20 years, not on the timeline that people were thinking, no. I think this might be quite different in so much as AI is definitely here, it's definitely happening, and I think the use applications are going to emerge really quickly, like you say, in the next couple of years. I question whether or not it's going to be these specific companies. So that's what I mean, Michael. And I do think this is a bit of an out there opinion, perhaps. I do think one of the reasons why companies like Meta are now jettisoning, DEI programs, and they're going to an X-style moderation policy where you have community notes rather than centralized teams assessing things. You can argue for or against those, whether or not they lead to good outcomes. They're definitely cheaper. And I think, it works both ways with these big companies. Somebody like Meta thinks, well, AI is going to mean we can reduce the costs of our headcount. We can replace a lot of our labor force. But also, it's going to be a very competitive world, and we might not be the market leaders. So that's a really good thing you said there, Michael, because I don't want people to get confused about this. AI is going to really, really, really change a lot, and it's going to lead to a hell of a lot of job losses. I think a decade is probably conservative, but I think, this decade, by 2035, lots of jobs are going to disappear, basically.
The hype thing, because sometimes I think people sort of imagine with hype that you've got all these people who are not very well informed just throwing their money at it because they're hoping the money is going to get bigger. My understanding with the AI boom is that it's actually sort of Google investing their profits in all of sort of these data centers, and Microsoft investing their profits in all these data centers. So it isn't sort of like these foolish investors like in kind of a tulip bubble. It seems to be that sort of CEOs who sort of understand the field, they want to get to artificial general intelligence first, and they're willing to put shed loads of money behind this to try and win the race, because clearly they think whoever gets there first is going to have a big advantage to some degree. I find it quite scary because you still also have the situation where no one really can explain why creating these agents that are smarter than us isn't necessarily going to be incredibly dangerous to us. In fact, most of these tech people say that, and we've shown you Jeffrey Hinton, I can't remember which one it is, before he was the sort of chief scientist at Google's DeepMind. He left the company so he could speak more freely about the danger he thinks it poses. But they're still, in this race, investing hundreds of $billions in data centers to get to artificial general intelligence as quickly as possible. Also potentially worrying. And one of Trump's first executive orders was to get rid of Joe Biden's AI safety bill. Now, I'm not expert enough to tell you how sort of functional or effective Joe Biden's AI safety bill would have been. But the idea of it being one of the first things he does in office to get rid of it while he's got Sam Altman standing behind him, who's just made his company, which was supposed to be a non-profit for the benefit of humanity, into a profit-making company while he buys multi-million-dollar cars, doesn't reassure me. Something else that doesn't reassure me is Donald Trump's other big set of announcements that will affect the rest of the world. Obviously, lots of things going on that affect sort of the politics of the United States and people within the country. I'm focusing today on what I think has global implications, and that is his policy with regard to climate. In his inaugural address, he promised America would drill, baby, drill. And in a video address to Davos, he said this.
I terminated the ridiculous and incredibly wasteful Green New Deal. I call it the Green New Scam. Withdrew from the one-sided Paris Climate Accord and ended the insane and costly electric vehicle mandate. We're going to let people buy the car they want to buy. I declared a national energy emergency, and it's so important, national energy emergency to unlock the liquid gold under our feet and pave the way for rapid approvals of new energy infrastructure. The United States has the largest amount of oil and gas of any country on earth, and we're going to use it.
That's not what you want to hear, is it? We're going to use all the oil. Leave it in the ground was always sort of a big slogan of the environmental movement. If we burn all the oil that's underground, all the oil and gas, we will burn the planet. And he's saying, all that oil we got under our continent, which, by the way, is more than anyone else has got, we're burning it all. As I say, worrying stuff. Industry experts, though, say it's not certain that Trump's love for oil will actually have much material effect. So the Financial Times report this. Executives warned that even Trump's full-throated support for fossil fuels and deregulation could have limited impact. And then a quote, as much as the incoming administration is very favorable around energy and power, we don't see a significant change in activity levels going forward. That's from David Schorleimer, he's the chief financial officer of ProPetro, an oil field services company. And they say producers' reluctance comes after 2 decades of soaring growth and sometimes punishing oil price volatility. And the point made in that article, which I think is interesting, makes a lot of sense, is that ultimately business will invest if oil prices are high enough, and they're not going to invest if oil prices aren't high enough that it makes it profitable for them to do the digging. So they said this, a recent Kansas City Federal Reserve survey found that the average US oil price needed for a substantial increase in drilling was $84 a barrel versus about $74 a barrel today. JP Morgan predicts that US oil prices will drift down to $64 a barrel by the end of this year, and shale activity will slow to a crawl in 2026. If prices are anemic, you can remove all the red tape you want. It's not going to move the needle on production, said Hassan El-Tari, Director of Companies and Transaction Research at S&P Global Commodity Insights. Now, that's showing that maybe Trump's words won't have that much impact when it comes to the amount of oil America will get out of the ground and then presumably burn or sell it so that someone else burns it. Of course, this shouldn't necessarily be too reassuring. And that's because the main reason a commitment to approving oil exploration won't make much difference is because Donald Trump isn't actually changing anything, right? Biden was approving them all anyway. He had approved a record amount. Biden's America was already the world's largest exporter of oil and natural gas. So when you're at that level, it is difficult, to make your output higher than it currently is. You're already at the limit. There was, though, a silver lining to the Biden administration, and that was he invested a lot in green technology. And that does seem to be somewhere where Trump seems to have a different approach, which might have a reasonably large impact. He explained his approach to renewables on Fox News on Thursday.
The wind blows and then it doesn't blow, and the things cost a fortune. They're made in China, and they kill the birds, and they're horrible. We don't want windmills in this country. We're putting an order out. I've already sort of done it. We don't want windmills. If you have a house and you're in vision of a windmill, your house is worth half. It's a disaster. And nobody wants them, and they're the most expensive energy of any kind of energy. You know what else people don't like? Those massive solar fields built over land that cover 10 miles by 10 miles. I mean, they're ridiculous, the whole thing. And by the way, you know where the panels come from? 100% of the panels, they're made in China.
Aaron, your views on Donald Trump and the climate. I suppose sort of one interpretation, it's going to be an absolute disaster. He's sort of going to ruin any progress that had been made, take us in completely opposite direction. The other view being, well, market forces will do their thing. Joe Biden was drilling for the oil anyway. Maybe it's just the sort of rhetoric which is going to change, not so much the outcomes.
They're made in China, Michael. It's quite a funny point, but it's also true. If you're trying to reduce a trade deficit with China, you probably don't want to be importing loads of their PV cells. By the way, that's an industry that the US just gave up on. When you deindustrialize, guess what? You have to import loads of industrial goods. Sorry, that's kind of the deal. And that's been your economic model for the last 40 years. In terms of wind is a very efficient source of energy, obviously, but it depends where you are. For Denmark or for the UK, wind is tremendously efficient at generating power, particularly offshore wind. Onshore too. I mean, offshore is just an extraordinary source for somewhere like Denmark. The US really, its bonanza is with solar, because much of the country is in the solar belt, gets a tremendous amount of energy. Obviously, you have less need for keeping warm during long, dark winter nights. Of course, there's also the issue of air conditioning there, but you need air conditioning when it's hot and when the sun's out. The problem with solar for colder countries with longer, darker winters is that at the very moment you need more energy, you've got less capacity that can be generated. Notwithstanding, solar is still a very useful source of energy for somewhere like the UK. When people say, oh, there's no sun here, we won't get any solar, look outside, look at all the green grass, look at all the trees. That's a solar-powered chemical reaction. Okay, there's plenty of solar energy. Can we use just that to get by? No, but it's a pretty useful thing to have. Now, in terms of AI, and in terms of these giant bits of infrastructure, they're going to have to be powered by new bits of energy infrastructure. I mean, it is probably fair to say that wind and solar probably wouldn't be particularly helpful for you. Nuclear would be, and Amazon in particular, but also Meta, have in the past been looking at nuclear as a means of providing the energy for the servers and whatnot for these massive, AI data centers. Right, huge amounts of energy will be needed for them, and I'm pretty sure it's Amazon who were basically looking at, like I say, new nuclear power. The idea that you would power a data center with coal, which is something that Trump said, is just wild. I mean, it's just extraordinary. The definition of a 21st century technology being powered by something from the 19th or 18th century is just wacky. you're perfectly at liberty to knock wind and solar, knock yourself out. I think they're very good. Depends where you are, but they're generally very good. Particularly in California, can do a hell of a lot with solar. Texas, a hell of a lot. Florida, a hell of a lot. But anyway, even if you don't like that, there's nuclear power. Now, I know there are people that are skeptical about nuclear power, but it's a very effective way at generating lots of energy with zero carbon. Now, we can talk about the waste product and how you dispose of that, the costs of that, etc., the danger of it. But in terms of, let's decarbonize energy supplies. Well, the French have had very low carbon energy for decades. It's called nuclear, right? All of their electricity comes from nuclear power stations. So I think from Trump, this is just kind of, it's bravado, right? It's not really a clear message. If he was going, we're going to build loads of nuclear, I'd be like, okay, well, that's a coherent, consistent line of thinking. This isn't. And also people drill, they extract energy for profit, right? These are private firms in a capitalist system. They do things for profit. If there's very low margins, they don't do it. If you get the price of energy globally collapsing, actually the incentives to frack kind of fall because fracking is quite expensive, right? This is not easy oil, hydrocarbons to extract. You have to break up. That's literally where the name of this stuff comes, shale gas. You have to really break up rocks, and then you get all this gas coming up, creates loads of extra waste product as well. Carbon monoxide being one, I think maybe helium too. I'm not a climate scientist. It's a very different kind of process, and it's a very expensive way of getting hydrocarbons. So, if you have global energy prices fall, all of a sudden it becomes kind of not that smart a deal. And your point, Michael, about, well, Biden signed off on all of this. This is really, really important, right? So the vibes with Trump, you think the world's falling apart, everything's changing, the US were the climate good guys. The reality is Obama and Biden have been Obama was the fracking president. I'm sure some of our viewers and listeners remember this. He was at a meeting with people and he said, I did this for you guys. And this is the gratitude I get. And it's kind of true. Obama was the president who drove the emergence of the US, fracking and shale gas industry. So this idea that Trump is taking the US in a direction they weren't already going is just, it's nonsensical. And there's two things I really want to convey to our audience here, right? Because many people be really black-pilled and really upset and worried about Trump. Two things. Firstly, if he does just do one term, the midterms for Trump are in November 2026, right? So he's got 22 months before people start talking about a successor. That's the reality. So he's going to have to do a hell of a lot really quickly. So if it feels like he's doing a lot, well, he kind of has to, right? He's on borrowed time. Secondly, and again, this is like key to people not feeling too black-pilled, the president can't do that much, right? He can with the two houses, of course he can, but the idea that a president of the United States has as much power as, say, the prime minister in the British system, probably before the Supreme Court, right? But under Thatcher, for instance, the amount of power concentrated in the prime minister with a large majority, like Margaret Thatcher, arguably like Clement Attlee, arguably like Blair for the first term, 2 terms, the amount of power that individual has far exceeds, in my opinion, the president. Because you're talking about a federal republic, 50 states, you have state laws, and that's why you've got all these executive orders coming through from Trump really quickly. And of course, they're going to make a big difference. But actually, a president can't do as much as perhaps we think. For those two reasons, like I say, there's a separation of powers. You obviously have the Supreme Court, and you have the 50 states of the federal system. So I do think because of those limitations on both time and just by how the US Constitution works, Trump is really making a show of how much he's changing. But as you said, on fracking, actually, this is not that. It's not obviously on Paris, it's a huge deal. But on fracking, it's not some massive shift with Biden and Obama.
The World Economic Forum in Davos is the annual get-together of the world's rich and powerful, usually with a few celebrities thrown in. And on Thursday, Donald Trump spoke to the conference via video call where he offered investors a carrot and a stick.
My message to every business in the world is very simple. Come make your product in America, and we will give you among the lowest taxes of any nation on earth. We're bringing them down very substantially, even from the original Trump tax cuts. But if you don't make your product in America, which is your prerogative, then very simply you will have to pay a tariff, differing amounts, but a tariff which will direct hundreds of billions of dollars and even trillions of dollars into our treasury to strengthen our economy and pay down debt.
Now, that is another issue where sort of Donald Trump, at least verbally, sounds very different to other people that stand up at Davos. Davos sort of recently has sort of been going down the ESG, um, what is that? It's, equality, sustainability, governance, potentially, um, where they're sort of talking about inequality. They say we care about green stuff. Da, 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 da. Donald Trump's come to my country, you'll have low taxes. Don't come to my country, I'm going to put tariffs on you. That's not what the other sort of people standing up normally sound like. He also had a message for leaders of the European Union.
They took court cases with Apple, and they supposedly won a case that most people didn't think was much of a case. They won 15 or 16 billion from Apple. They won billions from Google. I think they're after Facebook for billions and billions. These are American companies, whether you like them or not. They're American companies, and they shouldn't be doing that. And that's, as far as I'm concerned, it's a form of taxation. So we have some very big complaints with the EU.
I looked it up while that clip was playing. I got ESG completely wrong. Environmental, social, and governance. Not equality, sustainability, and governance, as I'd suggested. So that's what it stands for. That was, of course, Trump going to bat for his billionaire buddies in big tech who don't like the regulation and taxation they face in the European Union. However marginal that might be, the EU is really sort of seen as the center of where they are at risk from regulation. Many, of course, think it would be a good thing if we tax the tech giants more, not less, and regulated them more, not less. I am one of those people. Of course, the owners of the big American tech firms have become the richest people to ever live on this earth, and Trump's election shows how the fusion of extreme wealth and political power is leading to a new, more explicit type of oligarchy. But is there an alternative? Well, Davos is often a time when the big NGOs and think tanks put out their policy ideas for tackling global inequality, and the New Economics Foundation, alongside patriotic millionaires, have joined together to push for an extreme wealth line. This is a report released today. It's a play on the idea of an extreme poverty line, which is already in widespread use in global policy circles, including the World Bank. The report proposes the idea that global institutions should have a concept as well as an extreme poverty line, as having one of an extreme wealth line, above which no one should be enabled to rise. And this particular report consisted of interviews with a number of millionaires and policymakers to decide where the line should be. Most set it between $10 million and $1 billion. To put that in perspective, Elon Musk is currently worth $427 billion. To find out more about the concept, early today I spoke to one of the report's authors, Fernanda Balata, Senior Program Manager at the New Economics Foundation. And I began by asking her to explain the idea behind the extreme wealth line.
So the extreme wealth line, which is a concept being developed by a group of leading structural inequality thinkers and institutions, is a bold but still a very simple idea. So we recognize right now a poverty line below which people cannot live with dignity. We need an upper threshold for wealth, the point when it becomes harmful to society. So there is the time right now is quite urgent, and it's a timely concept to come in at the week that Trump got his inauguration in the U.S. and also the Davos World Economic Forum. In that structural inequalities and the climate crisis are worsening, and extreme wealth concentration is at the root of all of those challenges in society, and it is destabilizing democracy, society, and the planet. So we have close to like half of the world's population living on less than a living income, and 10 people, I can count that in my hands, are worth the equivalent of 3 billion people, the poorest in the world, what they have. And that is extreme wealth. It's having a corrosive effect on our political systems, and the ultra-rich having a disproportionate impact and influence on our politics, the media, the legal system, and the policies that affect all of us. So it's undermining the foundations of democracy, really. So an extreme wealth line would help counter those challenges by providing, the other end of the inequality debate, like I said, kind of complementing the idea of a poverty line to really put the spotlight on extreme wealth.
What would it do. So I suppose in terms of, let's use the sort of extreme poverty line as an analogy. So that's sort of accepted by the UN and the World Bank, and they write reports, and we have sort of these Millennium Development Goals, don't we, where we want to reduce the number of people in extreme poverty, and then they produce reports which shows, well, I know that extreme poverty has fallen quite dramatically since the 1990s, and we consider that to be a success. There are higher rates of poverty, or you can use a higher threshold where it doesn't look quite as impressive as when you use sort of extreme poverty as your line. What's the idea of an extreme wealth line? Would this be sort of something that the World Bank takes on board, the UN takes on board, and then they write reports saying there are too many people with extreme wealth, we need to do something about it?
Yes, I think, that would be a great achievement of the initiative and of the line. But I think the issue of extreme wealth is, it's two sides of the same coin, but they're not the same. And the ways to tackle them are not the same. So with the poverty line, it's very easy for us to think about a minimum, the cost of living, how to meet the cost of living, for example, to have decent education, health, and so forth. But when we start asking questions like we did in the interviews in our reports that was launched today by the New Economics Foundation and Patriotic Millionaires, when we start to ask questions about, is there a point at which it's too much wealth? Then you start to get into issues that are not just about the economy, and sustaining your basic needs. It is like, there's a culture that we're ingrained in that really talks about wealth accumulation as the route to success, in society. And so the extreme wealth line is, I really see it as a tool to start to, enter that debate from another end that talks about extreme wealth concentration actually posing risks to society and harming society. And we have so many examples out there of how it's harming democracy, how, the extremely rich have a disproportionate impact on, through lobbying, through, support of financing political parties and buying media outlets, and exerting all that incredible influence. So we need to be talking about, there is a point when it's too much, when it starts to harm all of us. And in terms of being taken by institutions, it's really important. We need institutional change really around these issues. We hear so much rhetoric around, world leaders and leaders at the Davos Economic Forum talking about, inequality is an issue we need to tackle, the climate crisis is an issue that we need to tackle. But we can't. You cannot sort out poverty and the lack of resources for all these global urgent needs, if you have most of the global resources hoarded in the hands of few individuals. And so this is the issue of extreme wealth. It's greater than ever in society. The U.S. Election of Trump, backed by billionaires, really, it's an extreme case, but this is a global issue. Think about rich oligarchies in Russia, in Azerbaijan, and, the incredible influence that Berlusconi had in Italy with his media empire. So this is a problem that has been here for a long time, but now it's just out of hand, unchecked wealth and power, and it's time that it ends. And an extreme wealth line can really help on that debate.
And do you sort of have any practical ideas for how, I suppose, extreme wealth, which distorts politics, could be challenged or reduced or limited? I totally agree with your point that sort of the inauguration this week has shown sort of how extreme wealth can distort politics. You've got Donald Trump there, where I think billionaires in their tens. Many of them, Elon Musk, obviously the world's richest man, bought Twitter, or X as it's now called, in Donald Trump's government. All something which I think most people can agree is fairly worrying, obnoxious. But I suppose the issue is there's a bit of a collective action problem, isn't there? How would one tax Elon Musk so that he's not as rich anymore? How would you put a limit on the wealth of these people? There isn't any global government, of course.
Yes, that is true. But we do have various institutions. We have national governments that should be acting on the public interest. And we do have international institutions as well, like the UN system and others that can that can create enforceable rules for the international community. So what we need is, the extreme wealth line actually, through our conversations with millionaires, political figures, and policy experts in exploring this concept, and getting to initial insights into how it would be taken by different stakeholders, well, those that I mentioned. We heard a lot about taxation, right? And there is a big movement right now for taxing the super rich and for taxing more wealth. And that's extremely important. And that's the starting point for policymakers on what they can do. But the extreme wealth line wants to go even beyond taxation. It's talking about how actually what's allowing for extreme wealth to be accumulated in so few hands in the first place, it is over exploitation of our resources, unsustainable. So we need more regulation around those practices. It is based on, forced labor or, very poor labor standards. So we need better labor standards, legislation policies. It is based on, the exploitation of care work. It's a disproportionate way to also value to reward value in our system. Who gets value? What gets valued? So it really is a deeper conversation here that we're trying to embark on, and I think it's very needed because, like I said, we are facing global crisis. The world is burning, inequality is soaring, and we see the impacts of that on social cohesion, on, how it undermines the institutions that are trying to, support people and protect us. And so we have a crisis of trust as well, and so extreme wealth is really at the root of all those challenges. We need to put a spotlight on it. And there's a range of solutions out there that we will be advocating for and that others are advocating for. And, we need a concerted effort by political leaders for that. But crucially, the extreme wealth line is proposing a wider democratic debate around this because obviously, as we know, to effect change in policymakers, we need the political space to be opened. And so we really want extreme wealth to be front and center of debates around inequality and a fair economy from now on.
That was Fernanda Bellata from the New Economics Foundation speaking to me earlier today. There's been a lot of coverage of Donald Trump pardoning the January 6th rioters, and people are rightly outraged. But there was another pardon in Trump's first week that's a bit more interesting. That of Ross Ulbricht, the creator of the Silk Road drug marketplace. This is a pardon that Trump promised to make during the campaign when he was speaking at the Libertarian National Convention to try and win the votes of what's ordinarily a pretty government-skeptical group. When he was at that conference, this is how it initially went down. There were some people chanting his name. It seemed like there were other people booing him, maybe suspicious of someone who wanted to enter government. These are the libertarians, of course. But everyone seemed to get on board when he made this promise.
And if you vote for me on day one, I will commute the sentence of Ross Ulbricht to a sentence of time served.
You can see lots of people there with free Ross sort of posters in the crowd. And the case of Ross Ulbricht is one very close to libertarian hearts. In 2013, he became the poster boy of anti-government and pro-individual liberty values. And when he was arrested as the creator of a dark web drugs market called Silk Road, the site was deeply anonymized, with users having to pay in Bitcoin to avoid detection, as they made untraceable purchases of illicit items, including drugs. Ulbricht, who went under the name Dead Pirate Roberts online, was charged with a range of felonies, but his reputation as a libertarian folk hero was cemented when extracts of his writings formed part of the prosecution's case against him. They included this from his LinkedIn account. "Now my goals have shifted. I want to use economic theory as a means to abolish the use of coercion and aggression amongst mankind. Just as slavery has been abolished most everywhere, I believe violence, coercion, and all forms of force by one person over another can come to an end. The most widespread and systemic use of force is amongst institutions and governments, so this is my current point of effort. The best way to change a government is to change the minds of the governed, however. To that end, I am creating an economic simulation to give people a first-hand experience of what it would be like to live in a world without the systemic use of force. Now, the reason I'm giggling is because, the way he's talking about this, it's as if sort of he was creating this brilliant future society. And when you use Silk Road, you'd realize you don't need the state anymore. Well, using Silk Road is just, looking for drugs or guns or not. I tried to use it once. I never managed to make a purchase because I always struggled to fill up my Bitcoin wallet. I wish I had, and I had some left over, and then I'd be rich. But I never managed to buy the Bitcoin. But the idea that you'd go on that website and think, yes, we don't need the state, let's have anarchism. So it just strikes me as a little bit bizarre. Anyway, in 2015, Ulbricht was convicted of distributing narcotics, engaging in a continuing criminal enterprise, conspiring to commit computer hacking, and conspiring to create fake identities and launder money. The then 31-year-old was sentenced to a life in prison without the possibility of parole. At the time of his conviction, the US Justice Department also went after some of Ulbricht's associates who claimed to have committed 5 murders on his behalf. Though, this is significant, the state was never able to prove the killings ever took place. So I don't think they ever, they said they'd killed people for him. They couldn't even prove that anyone had been killed, let alone that he'd ordered it. Libertarian supporters have long campaigned for Ulbricht's release, arguing that he was an independent thinker with a peaceful and gentle nature. And on a website for his supporters, they posted this video of Ulbricht shortly before his arrest.
Pretty sure I want to start a family in the next 5 years.
Nice. Okay.
Just make more friends and close people I love. Yeah, I want to focus on being more connected to people.
Very good. And 20 years.
20 years. I want to have had a substantial positive impact on the future of humanity by that time.
Trump's pardon commutes Ulbricht's sentence with time served. Posting on Truth Social about Ulbricht's commutation, he said this: I just called the mother of Ross William Ulbricht to let her know that in honor of her and the libertarian movement, which supported me so strongly, it was my pleasure to have just signed a full and unconditional pardon of her son, Ross. The scum that worked to convict him were some of the same lunatics who were involved in the modern-day weaponization of government against me. He was given 2 life sentences plus 40 years. Ridiculous. To be honest, I do agree that 2 life sentences plus 40 years is ridiculous, but it is also kind of strange to have a system whereby because some people supported you, you pardon their hero. Seems to be what happened here. On Wednesday, the now 40-year-old, Ulbricht posted this. So it appears to be Ross Ulbricht leaving prison with what looks like quite a nice, modest plant. Aaron, I hadn't thought about Silk Road for a while before this story broke. And it did remind me of sort of a period in the early 2010s when people really thought like Bitcoin, Silk Road, this was the future. I suppose it was sort of like post-financial crisis when sort of anarchism was kind of a bit more in vogue. How have your thoughts evolved on this? What were you thinking about Silk Road and Bitcoin back then?
I felt like there was clearly a shift away from the state's ability to exercise a monopoly on coercion and legitimate violence. I think that was the thing. You felt that power was draining away from the state, right? The sort of the state orthodoxy, the economic orthodoxy had been dismantled by 2008. You get Bitcoin, you get all these radical ideas about how to do things differently, from Occupy to the Pirate Bay. You still have at this point, prior to 2011, really, the idea of a productive commons. Those kinds of debates were in play, right? A different kind of way of doing production and sharing outside of property relations. If you're on the left or if you're on the right, beyond the surveillance and potential coercion of the state, which is where the Silk Road comes in. So there was a massive political bent to all of this stuff, and it wasn't just limited to the right. That's really, really important to say. Although I have to say, Michael, in 2025, just reading that thing you posted a few moments ago about a world beyond coercion and violence, it's just mad, isn't it? It is just mad. I know he means institutional coercion, which is to say, yes, there'll always be violence and coercion in the world, but we shouldn't have institutions like the state which reproduce forms of coercion and violence. But Anyway, it's not my bag. I know you used to be an anarchist, Michael. It's not my bag. I always sort of define myself as a libertarian, socialist, libertarian, communist. I think the state is a necessary evil, right? Which is kind of actually a kind of liberal view. You need it. Doesn't mean that you worship it and that it has the problems, the answer to everything, but it's necessary, even if it sometimes does curtail individual liberties. Yes, it's necessary. Anyway, in terms of Trump pardoning this, it's really interesting because in the 2024 election, the Libertarian Party, which is a significant party, only got, I think, about 600,000 votes. If you go back to 2020, they got 1.8 million votes. So is that the difference in the end between Trump winning or not in 24? Not really. But in a really close election, it absolutely would make a difference. And, if the Libertarian vote was like what it was 4 years earlier, I mean, I don't know the numbers. Maybe he loses Wisconsin. I don't think so. I mean, that was pretty close. That was the closest state, right? Maybe he does. But, you can look at a few different variables, and that is certainly one of them. That is certainly one of them, and something he, as a party strategist, got on top of, political strategist got on top of. And I maybe this is something we're going to talk about. I find it really interesting that somebody like Trump, who's viewed as iconoclastic and narcissistic, well, you know what? He tried to build a really big tent. He reached out to what would be viewed by the Republican establishment, or much of the Republican establishment, certainly by the sort of media establishment, as an irrelevance. He reached out to libertarian voters. Why is there such a markedly different attitude between Trump doing that with libertarian voters and Kamala Harris and the left?
Ross Ulbricht was very much at the forefront of the crypto movement when some people still saw it as emancipatory. Trump himself surely represents the final death knell of that dream. In the run-up to his inauguration, Trump launched his own meme coin called Trump on his platform Truth Social. These coins are completely useless. You can't buy anything with them. But MAGA fans flooded in, and the market cap of all Trump coins went up to $15 billion. Trump owned 80% of them. So in theory, he just made upwards of $10 billion in a day. Of course, if he'd tried to sort of convert those into dollars and sold those Trump coins, then the value would have collapsed. So it's not necessarily the case that he could have immediately converted that into cash, but still, that's quite a lot of market value to make in a day. The value has also since fallen. But asked about the coins at a White House press conference, Trump seems satisfied.
I don't know much about it other than I launched it. I heard it was very successful. I haven't checked it. Where is it today?
You made a lot of money, sir.
How much?
Several $1 billion, it seems like, in the last several days.
Several billion? That's peanuts for these guys.
So Trump was in a room with tech CEOs when he said that, hence the joke about a few billion being peanuts. Whether MAGA fans will find it so amusing when they realize they've blown money on something essentially worthless is another matter. But beyond scamming his fans, a former Trump employee suggested there could be a more dangerous motive behind Trump launching his own digital currency.
The bigger concern, Aaron, is that the way the cash moves here, it moves almost directly to Trump. And so it can be used just like his hotels were used in the first administration, where the foreign countries and wealthy people used his hotels to gain favor. Well, this is a perfect vehicle, okay? Because you can literally, a country could go in and buy $10 million worth of crypto coin, Trump's crypto coin, and he's the beneficiary of this. I think it's just flat out dangerous for national security that, that he could be influenced like this.
I mean, one thing that does, I think, separate Donald Trump from other presidents is how shamelessly he does use the office to line his own pockets. Aaron, I have to say, I mean, obviously it's outrageous, it's terrible. But sometimes I'm reassured when I feel like Trump is just trying to use the office of the White House to get himself richer, because I feel like if he was, more focused on some of his more political aims, that would be more damaging for the rest of us. If he just manages to pocket, a few extra million quid while in the White House, maybe that's a lucky break.
I think that's right. I mean, this is a hallmark of somebody who's not that serious, and he's just trying to make a lot of money. If you look at the great sort of politicians who reconfigured their societies, I mean, a great one is Ataturk. No children, selfless for the people. Here's Trump, creating a coin and bringing in lots of cash. I think that's right. Sort of politically, for people who don't agree with him, that They look at the project which he's a part of, which he leads, which is a really serious, impressive project in many ways, right? Elon Musk is the wealthiest person in the world who's basically backing him. And then you see something as ridiculous and as trivial as this. I know lots of money's involved, but politically it's trivial. And you think, phew, he's obviously going to do some pretty bad stuff. He is a serious person. He's the president of the United States, obviously a tremendously effective political operator. Phew, he does ultimately care, I think, more about, I could be wrong. I think he cares more about money than legacy. And actually, if you're worried about him, changing lots of things for the worse, that's probably a good thing.
Keep the man distracted. That seems to be sort of my best hope for the next 4 years. Aaron, thank you so much for joining me this evening. We'll be back on Monday for another live show. For now, you've been watching Novara Media. Good night.